So for those of you who've just joined, if you haven't already, if you can just pop in the chat your name and who you are, just so we get a sense of who's in the meeting today, that would be perfect. So for those who've just joined, again, just to say a big thank you for giving up your time on what is a sunny afternoon today. For those who don't know me, my name's Andy McGowan. I'm the Head of Carer Services at Caring Together. So my role in this is, my background has historically been young carers, but for the past few months I've been doing some work with the partners you saw on the initial slides around the work with parent carers, because it's an area that has long been seen that there's been a real gap in support for parent carers. You'll hear that throughout this event. So I've been working with a lot of the partners just to try and see how can we try and improve that support that's available for parent carers in Norfolk. So just in terms of the agenda today, it is quite a packed agenda from that sense. So we're going to go through a little bit of housekeeping, then the results of the parent carer survey. Then we've also got so Tim Ayres from Norfolk County Council Children's Services is going to give a bit of an initial response from their perspective in terms of what they've already done in relation to the survey results, but also what's still to come and to come next. And we've also got sort of Family Voice Norfolk and Sensational Families who are going to give their sort of take and perspective on the results as well. But then the key part of this event isn't just about us saying, right, here's the survey results, thanks very much, have a great afternoon. It's about saying, here's the survey results, but also what can we as a group do together? So we've got parent carers in the room, we've got professionals, excuse me, who work with parent carers, and we've also got commissioners here as well. So it's a real opportunity to see actually what can we do to try and give the best possible support for parent carers across the county. At the end of the session, as long as time allows, there will be the opportunity where we'll stay on. So we're here up until 2:30. And so myself, Family Voice Norfolk, Sensational Families, Carers Voice Norfolk and Waveney will all stay on the call. So to any parent carers who aren't aware of any of us or the work that we do, you'll be able to stay on and find out a bit more about what we do and chat to some of the people who are involved with those organisations at the end. Just to say, the slides will be shared around. So if anyone wants them afterwards, you will be receiving those afterwards. So just a bit of housekeeping. I think I've caught everyone and put everyone on mute if it wasn't already. So if I can ask if you can just keep on mute unless you're sort of coming forward to speak. I've already mentioned about recording the session. If you can pop comments or questions in the chat, that would be great. There's a lot of slides to start with, so we're going to go through all of those first, but there will be opportunity to look at some of those questions and the chat later on today. I've got my colleague, Tony Elliott, who's here as well. So if anything pressing comes up in the chat, I'll ask him just to notify me and just to let me know if anything does need to stop or if the slides stop working or anything like that. And really, I just wanted to sort of recap so that we're all really clear what the purpose of this event is today. So as you'll hear, there's been a lot of issues being raised by parent carers throughout the survey, so across the county. And the aim of today is really to see, okay, what can we do with this? What can we do moving forward? And there is some positive things already happening. I'm very mindful both from parent carers, but also from other groups of carers. If you speak to young carers, adult carers, there are much bigger, wider issues on a national level, whether it's to do with carers allowance, whether it's to do with financial entitlements, anything like that at all, which today isn't about those things. Obviously, we're linked into national channels to try and change some of those, but today is very much focused on what can we do to try and sort of keep the momentum going in Norfolk that we're starting to see building. And if any of you are on social media, there is the hashtag, which is Carers Week. So it'd be great if people could be tweeting or posting about the event today. But without further ado, just to sort of give people a bit of the setting the scene of the survey. So the parent carer survey was put together by the partners who are working on this piece of work. So I've mentioned them earlier today and they're on the first slide at the beginning. So it was live during March. As you can see, we had responses from 110 parent carers across the county. In terms of geographically, the highest responses you saw were South Norfolk and Breckland, but then there was a low uptake from North Norfolk. So I think one of the key bits for me is moving forward saying, actually, is this because there aren't as many parent carers identified in North Norfolk, or are they not taking part, or are there other reasons as well? Because it was only around about 5% of responses came back from that locality. as you can see, there are a number of parents caring for more than one child with additional needs or disability. And in fact, there were some participants where they were caring for 3 and sometimes even 4 children who've got disabilities and additional needs. So a significant amount of pressure put onto them as well. The vast majority of respondents were caring for a child aged under 18, but it wasn't exclusively. And so we've been able to look at some of the results that have come from those parent carers caring for when their child turns 18. Because I think for me, being fairly new into this area of work, I'm very mindful there's a lot of focus, quite rightly, on about the support for parent carers of children, but actually, what happens when that child turns 18? Do the parent carers know what support's available there? And vice versa. There are some carer services that adult carers can access, but parent carers can't. So it's been really interesting to look at some of the differences there. As you can see, the majority were caring for a child with autism there as well. So what I'm going to do is just take you through some of what the responses of what parent carers in Norfolk have said. So in terms of the impact, the survey also looked about what services work for parent carers and have been useful, particularly during the pandemic, but also looking at some of the areas and the common themes where things haven't been helpful. What have made things even more difficult for parent carers than they already are? So you can see there in terms of the main headlines, in terms of the biggest things that came out from this, was about the sheer number of carers not being able to take a break. So Carers UK, who are a national organisation for carers, are running a campaign at the moment all around trying to improve the access to breaks for carers. And as you can see for parent carers in Norfolk, this is a huge issue that's been made even worse by the COVID pandemic. So usual short breaks provision not being available. And we've seen in the comments some really positive uses of that funding, which has really helped the child, but has meant that parent carer hasn't been able to have that break as well. There's been a really resounding feeling that there's not enough support for parent carers, and it's something that will come out throughout the session today that you'll see issues there, and also the impact on parent carers' own mental well-being, their own health from that perspective. So there were 4 really clear areas that came out in terms of the most pressing impacts for parent carers across the county. But what I'm going to show you now is just a graph. And again, I'm not going to go through every single stat. It's not going to be a session full of numbers, you'll be glad to know. But as you can see here, there were lots of other areas where there are also quite relevant and quite interesting things to come out with as well. So you can see on the left-hand side, these were the 4 that I've already highlighted in terms of the biggest impact. So strongly agree or agree. But I think for me, in terms of some of the opportunities that came out here, was just a sheer number of carers where actually, and I'll finish this sentence here, is I have a plan about what I'd do in an emergency. So actually, if something was to happen to the parent carer, whether they've been taken into hospital, or it could be actually their car's broken down on the way home from work and they can't get back to meet their child. It could be in terms of the power's gone off and they rely on that power for storing the child's medication at a certain temperature in the fridge. A whole range of different situations that could make things even more difficult for parent carers. But as you can see here in terms of actually, when you look at in terms of the numbers who do, there's a significant numbers who don't have any form of emergency plan in place. And in fact, it's only around about 28% of respondents did have any form of plan in place. Also, it's a really mixed bag, as you can see here, about support from friends and family. So there's a lot of work in Norfolk about those more informal support networks, seeing what communities have you got around you to provide support. But actually, you can really see here that for parent carers, there are quite a few where they didn't have that support as well. And I've got a specific slide later on looking about the impact in relation to parent carers and employment as well. As I said, this isn't just going to be about a presentation by numbers. I also wanted to include some of the actual responses from some of the parent carers to really bring to life and put some sort of human element onto what they were saying throughout the survey. So I'm not going to read the quote out. You can see them on the screen here, but you can see just the impact here from trying to balance around the impact of education and about the resources that the school may or may not have to support, all the way through to actually that feeling of battling for support. And that was something that came out time and time again from parent carers, using the word to feel like they're having to fight for support, having to really battle in terms of to get their entitlements or to get support for their child. And some of it was around the practical support. So actually getting support around form filling. Sometimes it could be the really simple things that came up the parent carers just said, I just haven't got the time and I haven't even got the energy anymore to be fighting anymore. So you can see here, I've mentioned about in terms of friends and family and where they do or don't fit into the equation. So actually, you won't be surprised to see parent carers saying they feel exhausted. I think this year in particular has had an even bigger impact on parent carers than the general population. But also, some of the parent carers in the room here might associate with this feeling that actually people say, oh, it must be really hard for you, but actually they don't roll their sleeves up, they don't offer to come in and help. And it might be because they don't know what can they do to help from that situation. So it can be a really lonely and isolating place, is what a lot of parent carers were saying from that perspective. But I think it's really important to say this isn't just the COVID factor. It isn't just the impact of the pandemic on parent carers. You can see here that yes, for this parent carer, COVID did make it more difficult to get out. But even when they could get out, they were choosing not to, preferring to stay at home just because of the reaction they'd get from the public. And if her daughter has a meltdown or gets upset, the practicalities of having to take the buggy out with her daughter from that sense can really make it quite challenging for parent carers. And I think for me, one of the big concerns is as society is starting to open up now, are parent carers coming along with that as well? Or are there parent carers who are still in their own form of lockdown from that perspective moving forward? So as I mentioned, in terms of there's a real sort of noticeable impact in terms of carers in employment. So you can see here, actually, there was only around 12% of parent carers were working full-time, but it's only about a third of carers who are working part-time. So if you add that up in total, it was less than half of the respondents were in any form of employment at the time of the response. You can see a very small number were furloughed, but actually for me, the really startling one was the sheer number who said they feel unable to work because of their caring responsibilities. And so I think, again, it isn't just about employment, it's about actually the quality of life of the parent carers, it's about the financial impact it has on them and on their families as well. So it was an area of the survey that really was quite telling. And so some of the work that we've been doing is starting to link in with people in the DWP around their awareness of parent carers and about their awareness of actually some of the challenges that are faced if there are people trying to get back into employment as well. As I mentioned, in terms of please do pop things in the chat, as I said, and I will come back to anything later on as well. And then just on that employment prospect, again, you can just see some of the examples, the real life cases that parent carers sort of put in the survey. So someone who's got the qualifications to be a teacher, possibly wants, that's a career they possibly want to do, but saying actually they can't send him to any other childcare because of his level of needs, they can't meet his level of needs, and so actually can't be a teacher, instead has to take a more part-time position as a teaching assistant just because of the fact that it hasn't got the replacement care for their child. Similarly, the impact of caring in terms of here, someone who was in employment, but actually just physically couldn't cope anymore with the impact of the caring responsibilities and with the impact of trying to keep up with employment as well. But employers have got a huge part to play. So at Caring Together, we've got the Carer Friendly Tick scheme for employers, and we've got a small number. I can count them probably on one hand of employers across the county who've got the Carer Friendly Tick. So Norfolk County Council are one of them. You've also got a solicitors firm in Norwich who've got them. There's a few others. Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust as an employer have just got it. But actually, there is so much more we need to do to get more organisations, more businesses recognised as carer friendly. But you can see here, so work offers flexible time, but actually they still need to make those hours up or they financially lose out from that position. So I think there's lots of work to do around care awareness and about what support employers can do, because actually it's in everyone's interests. Of course, it's in the parent carer's interest if they're in employment and they want to stay in employment and they can, but it's also in the interest of the employer as well. So they don't lose out on staff, they don't lose out on staff through sick days. And it is really in terms of everyone's benefit to try and get this right. And again, I'm not going to read this out. I'll just give you a second just to read this one, just to, again, put some human context on what was said here. And I think later on in the presentation, we'll come back to this issue about the barrier that having a diagnosis or not having a diagnosis can be for parent carers to access support. but also in terms of that passing around the system like a hot potato, saying, oh, no, it's not this, it's that, so that's their responsibility. Oh, no, it's not this, it's that, it's their responsibility. And all the while, it's not just a case that's being passed around the system, it's actually people. It's actually families who are actually just spending more and more time being unsupported because they're being told, oh, go to this organization, they can help. And then they get said, well, actually, it's not that, it's the issue, so you need to go to that organization. So I think that has really been telling for me throughout this work, just about the opportunities for more joined up working there and actually making it really clear for parent carers as to who can support and making sure we get it right. But also the gap that to me that's coming out is that having someone to fight in the parent carers corner. I think you see on the adult carers side, if we see that on the adult carers perspective, there are staff working for Carers Matter Norfolk who can say, actually, no, that's not right. That's not the case. They can make the phone calls, they can do the emails. And it's actually who's able to do that for the parent carers. We've seen this later on, where if a parent carer is open to social care and has a social worker, brilliant. We see an example later on where that really helped and made a difference. But we've seen and we know there are countless parent carers, hundreds and probably even thousands, who aren't open to any form of statutory support. So how do we make sure those families and those parents are supported as well? So as I mentioned, as part of the survey, we asked parent carers actually what services and organisations have been helpful to them in their role as a carer, what has made things easier. And so what I've done here is I've just managed to squeeze them all onto one slide. But you can see just the range of different organisations that came out. The ones that are in bold aren't because anyone has sponsored me and said, can you put us in bold? It's because these are the ones that came out multiple times from parent carers from the survey. So you can see here, so that you won't be surprised to see that Family Voice and Sensational Families have come out lots of times throughout the survey. If I listed them every single time, I'd probably have about 10 different slides with this. But also Portage. The Portage service came up and there were lots of really positive comments about the difference that they've made, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. But again, it's one saying, do all parent carers know what they do, what support they are able to provide? I'll be honest, for me, coming from a young carers background into the adult carers and parent carers world, I don't have all the detail about what Portage do, what they don't do, and what support's available. So the real opportunities here. But you can see also, so social services are also there, and it was different elements of it. So sometimes it was the short breaks part of it. Sometimes it was a social worker as part of the Children with Disabilities team. Other parts have been a sort of the education inclusion team from that perspective. So lots of different components that came out from this. But you can see there's a wide range. So we saw some GPs, we saw some schools, but you won't be surprised to hear that actually, just like there are some GPs and some schools included in the what's worked well, there are also lots of schools and GPs where they're included in the what hasn't worked well from that perspective. So I think for me, the next opportunity is how do we build on these GPs, these schools, these workers who are doing brilliant work to try and make that business as usual. So that's actually what every parent carer gets across the county, rather than it being a postcode lottery for them. And what I've done here is I wanted to just include where some of those individuals have been named. Apologies for some, I don't have surnames. This is the information I have from that perspective. But you can see individual teams have been named in terms of being really helpful. So the Cove Clinic at the James Paget, Fiona at the NNN. I know we've got someone on the call from the NNN. I doubt we'll be able to pinpoint which Fiona it is, but just knowing actually that whoever that Fiona is made a real difference to that parent carer. The autism nurse, Children with Disabilities team social worker. And that's a prime example here where they had a social worker. That social worker could fight their corner for them and make those calls. But actually, what about if they didn't have a social worker? Who's going to do that for that parent carer and their family as well? And you've seen here in terms of the younger age group, so the early childhood services. Again, it really shows that individual workers can make a difference as well. But in order to get it consistent across the county, we really need to get the carer-friendly communities concept really being embraced, getting more GP surgeries, more hospitals signed up to the carer-friendly tick, getting more employers, as I mentioned earlier, but also more schools. We've now got around about 20 schools who've got the carer-friendly tick, but we know there are well over 500-600 schools where young carers are, but also where the children of the parent carers attend as well. So there's a huge amount of work still to be done. So as I mentioned, that was focusing on some of the positives. But as you'll be not surprised to hear, there are things that haven't been well. Apologies, I'm not sure if you can see the top of the title. I'm not sure if the bar's showing it or not. But what I've done is just themed some of the common things that came out from the parent carers in the survey. Some of them you won't be surprised to hear, because just from the time I've been spending with Family Voice Norfolk and with Sensational Families and speaking with parent carers, these are things that I'm hearing time and time again from parent carers. The fact that actually for lots of parent carers, getting a formal diagnosis is a key to unlocking lots of services. So it's focusing on the diagnosis of the child rather than the impact it's having on the parent carer. And that came out time and time again in survey responses about the challenges of being able to get support without that assessment there. Really timely, over the last few months, we've seen a real drive to get more carers registered on their carers register with their GP surgery. But as you can see here, there were GP surgeries not registering parent carers as carers. They weren't seeing them that actually, no, it's not just something that any parent does. Actually, some of the tasks and some of the responsibilities that parent carers are taking are far beyond that any parent could do. I'm the parent of 2 young children. I couldn't imagine doing some of the tasks that parent carers are having to do day in, day out for their children, even up into their adult lives from that perspective. I've already mentioned about the fight for support as well, sort of the lack of support available compared to other carers. Because I think when you speak to parent carers, what they say is, great, when my child turns 18, there's this whole array of services that I can access, from emergency planning, from a dedicated advice line, to community-based staff who can help do referrals, to CUPPers, to health and wellbeing funds. There's a whole range of different support available. But when my child is 17 and 360 days, actually, apparently, according to the system, my situation is vastly different. What parent carers have said to me, both through the survey and over the past few months, is actually the impact on the parent carer doesn't change that significantly, even over a couple of years. They say, actually, for me, the situation has been like this for 10, for 15 years. So at the moment, it's all dependent on how old the child is rather than the impact of the parent. And that's something that has to change from my perspective. And you won't be surprised to hear about long waiting lists as well. So the parent carers who are saying they've been waiting over a year, 18 months for support or for some assessments to take place. And then when some of those assessments have taken place, some of the responses from parent carers was, it felt almost like a tick box exercise, that great, I've waited so long for this assessment, and then I've sort of been fobbed off from then as well. And then I think some of it was more about practical and about service expectations and what services provided to parent carers. So communication, I've mentioned before about where to access information and support, not listening to their concerns, and also about thresholds as well, about the fact that often, and I've got an example later on, where they weren't deemed high enough risk to get that form of support, but then they were too low a risk to be anywhere else in terms of support. So again, that's a real barrier in terms of accessing support for parent carers and their families. And what was really lacking, and there is work starting to happen around looking at this, is where's the preventative support for parent carers? There is lots of support available once it gets to a crisis. When it gets to a safeguarding, lots of resource will be put into that. But actually, how do we stop getting to that crisis point for parent carers, for their families, but also for us as a county? Because actually, that makes a significant difference in terms of the cost. If you can get the information early on, if you can get early support in place for a parent carer, if they've got access to link into practical support, emotional support, they know who to speak to, so they feel less lonely and isolated, they know they're not alone, access to a break, all of that adds up to mean actually it reduces the chances significantly of going through to a social care referral or a crisis intervention, or even the parent carer saying, I physically can't take anymore, I just can't continue doing that. Because what will happen is if a parent carer breaks down and can't do it, it will then become the responsibility of the local authority and also of health to address the situation in a much shorter period of time than it would have had otherwise to do so. And this is just a really prime example of one of the cases in point. I could have used a whole range of different quotes and different examples. I'll just let you read this one, because I think it really sums up just a whole range around this about their experiences. Because I think what I took away when I read this, when I was going through the survey responses, is actually what a dreadful situation that was for that parent carer and her family being passed from pillar to post, but also just a sheer number of missed opportunities to get this right. Just looking at the number of professionals who are involved, the actual cost to the system of so many different professionals being involved because that family is being passed from pillar to post, and ultimately what happened at the end of it. So far as we can see, they're no better off than when they started the process. That actually, for over a period of years, nothing has got better for that family in terms of support. There is no additional support available, and they still don't know in terms of where they're at or what support's available for their child or for them as a parent. So I think that really just brought to life just of actually how many missed opportunities there have been. And there were other quotes I could have used as well from the survey that sort of backed up that example as well. So as part of the survey, in terms just as we get towards the end, so we asked them, parent carers, were they involved in Norfolk County Council at all, particularly in relation to short breaks, but also parent carers needs assessments, which every parent carer has a statutory right to, and also the Preparing for Adult Life service, also known as PFAL. As you can see here, short breaks was an area where quite a few of the respondents had accessed, and there was some really useful feedback. There was lots and lots of positive things that came through, particularly about how the funding has been used flexibly over the past year, but also there's really constructive opportunities around short breaks. And we've got Rob Cole on here who's sort of overseeing some of the work around short breaks. And I know he's really keen to use some of this findings to say, actually, how can we improve the service? How can we make it even more beneficial for parent carers? But the thing for me, the thing that really stood out was so only 12% of respondents had had a parent carers needs assessment, but nearly 1 in 10 parent carers didn't even know if they'd had one at all, which I think is quite telling about actually how the parent carers needs assessment process is working. It asks questions which we've already started to explore as a group. Why are so few parent carers requesting assessments? Why do parent carers who might have had one not know if they've had one? But also, more importantly, what are the outcomes for parent carers from having an assessment? Parent carers have got multiple challenges on their time. So why would they go through the extra time of doing a parent carers needs assessment if it's not in their interest as well? So again, for the parent carers who are in this session today, there is work starting to be underway about reviewing how parent carers needs assessment work, both about the information about them, but also about the whole practice and experience. So if any of you do want to get involved, there will be opportunities to make sure that you know how to get involved later on as well. And you saw here a really small number that had support from the Preparing for Adult Life service. And again, this is an area where it's only started, but hopefully will sort of improve moving forward, and opportunities around that transition when that young person is approaching adulthood as well. So as I mentioned, there was some positive and some constructive feedback, which I'll let you just have a look at here. And as I said, these slides will be made available to everyone who's attended, plus all parent carers who completed the survey. So even those who couldn't come along today, because they were all invited to come along as well. So you'll be able to see these in more detail at a later date as well. So in terms of where people currently go for information, advice and support, as you can see, it's a real mixed bag. So in terms of sensational families came up, and family voice were two of the highest ones as well. But also in terms of school, so education, early year providers and colleges, they came up really highly in terms of sources of information for parent carers. And then when I've looked at the other, a significant amount of that was on Facebook, so in terms of social media as a source of information, particular pages that people went to as well. And interestingly, in terms of what's the best way to communicate with parent carers and getting information to them, there were two areas that beyond anywhere else that you can see really stood out. So in terms of email updates with useful information, latest support, but also just having the ability to have a one-to-one conversation with someone, whether it's over the phone or whether it's in person or to drop in, just being able to speak to someone rather than having to just look through websites. For some parent carers, that works, and you can see about workshops from that perspective. But in terms of actually other ways, you can see that direct contact, something that was really highly and positively received by parent carers. And so to finish, the final bit that we did before I sort of invite for a response from, I'll invite Tim, and then in terms of Nikki and Tracy to come in, is we asked parent carers in terms of what, if we're looking at new support for parent carers, what would you say are the biggest priorities? What would make the biggest difference to them? So what I've done here is just ranked in order. These are the areas that were rated as the top and the highest priorities. So you can see in terms of, so nearly half said about having a break, and that sort of ties in. It's come out time and time again for the survey about being able to access information and support in a really easy manner, that one-to-one support. So you can see there's lots of different areas that really came out within that top priorities for support. Sorry, the slides just slowed down a second. And then again, just some of the quotes just to really back it up here. So having access to some of the similar support other carers have, that those parent carers can access when their child turns 18. Help around some of that transition to the next steps, some of the practical side of things, signposting. But as I mentioned, that's someone to really be in their corner, to really sort of actually make those calls, do those emails, make those referrals, chase them up, find out about what's happening with progress. That's some of the stuff that's really sort of making a difference. Say, even if it's for that short period of time, just to help that parent carer get back onto a level playing field and onto an even keel, as you saw the wording there. And then here's just some of the final ones. Again, some of the practical support, some of the information that's available for them as well. So it really is a variety of things that came out, but actually a lot of this isn't stuff that's rocket science. Some of these things happen already for other groups of carers. So again, there's opportunities to say, great, if there's a first aid training session going on for adult carers, can it be something that parent carers can access? If there's information around sort of Mental Capacity Act in terms of actually around assistive technology, again, that's something that we make available to adult carers through the Carers Matter Norfolk service. So again, there are real clear opportunities and what I could term quick wins here. So it's not all just about big ticket things that make the difference as well. So that's everything from the survey. As I said, it is a bit of a whistle-stop tour and a lot of slides, but I wanted to be able to make sure we've got a good time for discussion as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, because that'll give me the opportunity, to catch up with some of the chat that's been going on, but also I'm going to hand over to Tim Ayres, who's the Assistant Director for Commissioning and Partnerships at Children's Services, just to give sort of Norfolk County Council's response to some of the findings from the survey, talk about some of the things that they've already been doing, but also some of the next steps. So I'm just going to hand over to Tim now.
Thanks, Andy. And thanks for everybody for the session today. Really, I think it's a really helpful session. And I suppose I'd start by saying the survey is incredibly powerful in terms of the messages that's in there. I think it's incredibly valuable. Are they things that we possibly didn't already know in some cases? No, but I think to hear directly the lived experience of parent carers in the way that the survey brings that to life, I think is incredibly powerful, and I think needs to be seen as a call to action really for the local authority, but actually for a whole range of services and organisations that are out there. As Andy said, I think it's really positive that as part of the survey, you know, a range of services have been identified, including some of the services provided by Children's Services, have been identified as kind of really positive and helpful services. So on the one hand, that's great, but clearly the overriding kind of takeaway messages, I think, for Children's Services is there is a lot to do in terms of getting right some of the issues that clearly the experience isn't as it needs to be for children and for parent carers. We know, and we knew during the last year or so during the pandemic, that all families have been under, all of us have been under pressure. Very strange times, difficult times for many individuals and families. And we know, and we knew from early on in terms of the conversations we were having with the parent carer forums, but also people like Andy and Caring Together, the families where children have got additional needs were under particular pressure in terms of the situation. And really in response to that, one of the things we did back end of middle of last year really was pull together. We'd already pulled together a group that was focusing on the presenting issues and needs for young carers during the pandemic, and that been incredibly positive. piece of partnership work done collectively together, and we kind of replicated that in terms of wanting to pull together a parent-carer partnership group. We asked Andy to take a lead in terms of chairing that partnership conversation. And very deliberately we've done that from Children's Services point of view, because we wanted to make sure that there was some grit in the system and recognition of the pressure that we thought families where children got additional needs and for parent carers were the kind of pressure that people experienced during the pandemic. So that activity feeds into our Safeguarding Children's Partnership, which gives it some kind of senior oversight from a whole range of organisations, which is helpful in terms of making sure that stuff progresses. We've also recently, on the back of the survey results, invited Andy and Tracy from Family Voice Norfolk to join the Children's Services leadership team again, because I think, as Andy was describing and as has come out in the survey, actually the needs and views that are being expressed by parent carers don't relate to a single service, but actually the kind of range of issues and pressures that families are feeling. Some of that relates to the child's disability, but actually it's a whole set of wider issues, whether that's around mental health and well-being, either of children or of parent carers themselves, the lack of networks for people and support networks in terms of that sense of loneliness and isolation, and then of course the kind of impact and pressures that come not just because of the pandemic, but potentially that might have made it worse in relation to the kind of impact for parent carers in terms of access to work and resources. So and we wanted to come to the leadership team rather than just into a single bit, because actually it's going to require a response from all parts of children's services, not just say from a commissioning point of view. So as I say, the groups come together, is working on a shared action plan. We've got parent carer voice represented in the conversations, and obviously the survey is incredibly helpful in terms of giving some richness and depth to kind of the kind of issues that we need to be working with parent carers to address. Progress so far, always frustrated that progress takes a lot longer than I'd like it to be, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that will share that frustration. But increasing access for parent carers to welfare support, welfare rights information. We know that's been a particular significantly important issue for all families actually during the pandemic, or many families during the pandemic. I think the opportunities for the Let's Talk sessions led by Family Voice Norfolk and others, where we've had an opportunity to focus specifically on the experience for parent carers, is again similar to the survey. It's been a really powerful and useful opportunity for us. One of the early pieces of work that's been done is around emergency planning. I think Andy touched on that earlier. So we've collectively done a piece of work with young carers earlier last year around emergency planning, and actually I've picked that up as a piece of work with parent carers, and I think that has been received positively from those that have been part of that piece of work. And then there were very practical things we were able to do during the pandemic in terms of making sure the parent carers were included as part of the priority list around things like COVID-19 vaccinations for carers, which again obviously has been a real concern for people. Clearly, there are some really significant next steps that we need to work collectively to progress on, and I think one of those is around the parent carer needs assessment, both in terms of what it is, the process, making sure that it's a process that is helpful and is valuable, and then critically, it has to be a process that leads to improvement in some way. I don't see it as a referral mechanism to access a service, but clearly what needs to happen as a result of completing a parent carer needs assessment is making sure that then the appropriate support that is needed is in place. And we know that we've got some gaps in terms of that type of service, whether that's around thinking about the transition between being a parent carer or an adult carer. There shouldn't be such a kind of cliff edge between those two experiences. And I think there's an opportunity to work with parent carers to think about what kind of support is needed. The kind of early messages, in the sense that I've taken away, is it starts with being able to access information easily, so kind of self-help stuff, whether it's online or wherever it happens to be. But as you saw in the survey results, people will go to lots of different places for information, and that's fine. But I think we have an opportunity to make sure that there is join up and coherence in terms of information. So whether you go to the GP surgery, you go to Just One Norfolk platform, you go to Counc Together, there is consistent, clear information that's available. I think another strong message that's come out is it's for some people that's what they want to be able to do, is to access that self-help information online, but actually for others, they really just want somebody to be able to talk to, somebody to be able to have a helpful conversation in terms of a bit of advice that isn't about assessing whether or not they meet a threshold for a service, but is about providing that kind of early help and support. And then clearly, depending on the nature of the situation within individual families, we need to make sure that our kind of range of support services that are available are in place and meeting their needs, whether that's through our social work teams, through our family support teams, through the short break service, and again, really positive to hear some positive feedback about short breaks. But in itself, short breaks can't be the answer to everything that we need to be doing in working with parent carers. I think there's a really key piece of work around awareness raising, kind of in the way that I was describing, that actually we very deliberately wanted to take the survey results back into the whole of the leadership team for the department. And clearly what's come out in the one of the survey slides is there's a whole range of services and organisations and agencies that have an important part to play in terms of that complete package of support for parent carers. And like we have done quite successfully with young carers, and around in the partnership group, we're focusing on thinking about how we build awareness across those range of services and professionals, so that it's not about individuals who happen to understand what the experience means to be a parent carer, but actually we can be more confident that actually there is an appropriate understanding across kind of different professional groups. And obviously things like the carer-friendly communities type approach is a helpful way to progress with that. So that's probably all I'm going to say, Andy, if that's okay for the moment. But I think it's recognising the value of the survey and the direct feedback, but I think also recognising that we have got a lot more to do. The way to progress that and move that forward, I want that absolutely must be about working in partnership with parent carers. It's not about us making a decision and doing something to people. And we've got two significant bits of transformation activity happening within the department, but also with partners. One is around looking at our provision for children with disabilities and making sure that kind of complete offer makes sense, particularly from family service user point of view. And then significantly, the other really key piece of work that is just starting is around that piece around early prevention, which Andy touched on about actually the real importance, and not just for parent carers actually, but certainly specifically in this context of the conversation today, the importance of early preventative support and advice and help as part of improving the situation really. So I'm going to pause there.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. It's much appreciated. I think, as you said, there is a huge amount of work still to be done. But I think we've got parent carers involved. We've really clearly seen what it is that they need. And I think it's about making sure it is going to be the support that is needed. And I think it's also not just about saying, right, let's duplicate the support that's available. I've seen in the chat saying there's a lot of support groups on Facebook for support. So great, brilliant, that's there. So I think it's actually saying what's going to make the biggest impact for parent carers. Because again, things like enabling parent carers to have access to a break, ensuring parent carers are able to work should they want to from that perspective, actually making sure that in terms of the review of the child's needs from that perspective, those are some of the things that can't be done in terms of actually through some of the groups and through some of the support groups. One of the things we've done is link in parent carers so they can access the welfare rights unit. So in terms of actually if they are needing to do appeals around their sort of financial position, actually they're able to access that just like any other carer can. From that perspective. So I think it is looking about what is the support that's needed rather than just duplicating as well. So I'm going to hand over now to to Tracy from Family Voice Norfolk, and I've seen in the chat is going to be Johnny from Sensational Families. So they're both organisations who we've been working closely with around this piece of work, and I rely on them entirely to help me understand in terms of some of the issues, but also to sort of get parent carers involved as well. So I'm just going to give them the opportunity to give some of their feedback and some of their thoughts to actually the survey and around actually the work that's underway first. So Tracy, I'll hand over. I appreciate you've got another meeting to go to, so I'll hand over to you first, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody, and thanks Tim and Andy for going through the survey and giving us some more information, Tim. What struck me with the survey was that, you know, people on the whole are happy to do what they do, but it's when it gets to a point that you can't carry on, that's when you need the help. And, you know, like Tim said, if you had the early help, hopefully we wouldn't get to that point. But for me, the employment thing, I haven't been able to work since my young man was, I want to say 9 or 10, and he's 25 now. And what I've lost by not being in employment is obviously the money. I've lost the friendships that I had, and just being me. When I wasn't a parent carer, I wasn't a parent. We were just girls together that were, you know, having a laugh and maybe able to go out on a Saturday night occasionally. But that all goes away when you're not employed. The same as when our young people who do have additional needs and also learning disabilities, when they're not in work, they're the things that they miss too. So, you know, for me, there's a push on that too. The well-being stuff, you know, going to work gives you a feeling of well-being too, that, you know, you're doing something other than the tasks that you know are day in, day out. So that to me is the employment is key, but there needs to be an awful lot of scaffolding, I'll say, around you and the family to be able to make that happen. Looking at the survey and looking at some of the comments, you know, a big thing flashed before my mind: the key worker. We all need key workers. We need someone to take that from us so that we don't have to fight, so we don't have to battle, so that if we're writing emails, you know, late at night, and inevitably that is when it happens, when everyone else has gone to bed, that you're then having to write the emails, and hopefully they'll get answered the next day. So that somebody takes some of that off you so that you don't have to battle in that way. And also when I think it was Tim talked about a cliff edge, actually for parent carers it isn't a cliff edge. We can't wait to get to that cliff edge and fall off in that sense, because we are going to get a service, whereas at this point in time we don't. So it's kind of a reversal, that, you know, once you get to adult services, for our young people there's a cliff edge, but for us there's an enhancement of getting your child to 18 and being able to pick up on some of those carers services that up until now we've not been able to access. And just to finish before I go off to my other meeting, just to say this isn't something that has just come to people's forefront of their minds. This has been going on for years. Sharon Brooks will recollect that, you know, it's something that we have been talking about for years and years and years, the disparity between parent carers and carers that are caring for adults. And like Andy said, you know, 17 and 364 days to 365 days, those people don't change, we don't change, but the services do, and that's not fair. And we need to make sure that we work hard for those parent carers in Norfolk, and to make sure that that is a level playing field. So thank you for listening, and I'll leave it there, and really just to say, watch this space.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tracy. And without further ado, I'll hand over straight over to Johnny.
Hello. I'm just trying to turn my camera on. Not succeeding. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Ah, here we go. Can everyone see me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah, so just some feedback on the survey. I think I'm right in saying that there were 1,100 respondents, and I think that that is somewhere close to the number that the official home educators have grown in the last kind of 12 to 18 months. So obviously, if parents are taking on that home educating role, then that's an increase in the caring role, increase in parents who are having to make a decision about, do I step up and be the person who sacrifices working to support my child in a way where the state has not been sufficiently able to. And so I think, that's just an interesting thing to highlight. And it also highlights that actually there are so many more parent carers out there. So we want to be aiming for a greater level of feedback. So I think that's the first point. I don't really know what to think about the different respondents in different areas. I remember you saying that Norfolk hadn't provided much response, and there are probably lots of things contributing to that. But I do definitely think that when you're looking at the respondents who have indicated what worked well, I really think that what we have to do better in our services and mirror the kind of the voluntary and social enterprise sector is really coming from an empathy and a compassion through understanding the lived experience, the sheer complexity, the amount of emotion that is involved in the everyday, and it's a long journey of everydays as well. And I just think that there are some statutory services, in my opinion, that really need to think about protecting against a malevolent effect. And what I mean by that is a waiting list, or some of the things that we've talked about comorbidities and not being able to access services because of diagnoses or lack of diagnoses. The news to those families that either they're not meeting threshold or there's some ineligibility criteria is massive, and it's an enormous malevolent effect. And we have to, the statutory services have to do better at making sure that any contact they have with those families has some level of benevolent effect, some level of containment, some compassion for just where that leaves them. And I don't think that that's an easy thing to achieve with the current approach that we have, because I do think that we are going to have to move away from trying to only focus on value for money and only focus on the bottom line, and move towards actually understanding how we can connect with people in very complex situations. And that needs to start early. It needs to start now. We need more trauma-informed understanding so that we can have a benevolent effect, even when we don't have the resources to support, or we don't have an opportunity to take somebody in straight away and they have to be on a waiting list. If we can connect with them compassionately, with empathy, then at least we won't make it worse for them. And that's that's pretty much my feedback, really.
Brilliant. Thanks, Johnny. I think you really highlighted there's a whole range of different areas that sort of need to be sort of developed as we're moving forward. So I really appreciate your thoughts. And I think working with yourselves, working with Family Voice, but also the other partners involved in this is going to be key. Because I think when I agreed to sort of be part of some of this work, and I said I'm not employed by Norfolk County Council to do this work, it's an area that I've sort of happily taken forward because I've seen there's a real gap. I think the caveat for that was I'm happy to do it as long as it actually brings about some change. What I didn't want is this survey to just be a report that goes on a shelf or create some social media posts that have gone on there that we retweet a few times, we pat each other on the back, and then nothing changes. I think parent carers have been doing that, have been having that issue for years, where they've been raising issues about the situation and nothing's really changed. I think obviously you've heard from Tim today, but also we've got Bethany Small here from an adult services perspective. We've got Vicky Jones, who's a programme director of the Commissioned Adult Carers Service, because actually, as Tracy said, it's not a cliff edge, it's a reverse cliff edge. And so we need to make sure that support exists irrespective of the age of the child, but also make sure that it's a seamless sort of process for parent carers through that transition phase. So I think having children's services and adult services in agreement that things need to change is something that'll really benefit as well, because one of the areas we haven't talked about is, okay, for those parent carers where their child is over 18, does the Commission support meet their needs? Actually, are they accessing that support? Do they know that support's available? And if it's not meeting their needs, what is the support that will meet their needs from that perspective? So I think there's a huge amount of work still to be done as well. So what we're going to do now is just break out into some breakout rooms, just to give the opportunity in a slightly smaller groups, just for people to sort of give their feedback on some of what they've heard, but also in terms of what are some of the next steps that need to happen. So there's going to be 3 breakout rooms. We're going to be myself in one, Rob Cole, who I mentioned earlier, will be in another, and Tim will be in the 3rd one. So it's really just the opportunity to give your reflections on what you've heard today, but also in terms of think about any other suggestions that haven't come out of there in terms of what we can do locally. There are some of these bigger fights that absolutely need to continue try to be happening on a national level, but looking at what can we do in Norfolk to try and improve the situation. So my colleague Tony is going to break us out into 3 breakout rooms now. We're going to have about 15 minutes, and then there'll be feedback to the whole group afterwards. So if I can ask Rob and Tom, that'd be great.
And now they're going to put us into breakout room.
We're gone.
We're gone.
That's efficiency.
Right, go.
I thought, oh, what if we have to choose? I don't know.
I was thinking, I don't think I can remember 1, 2, 3. I hope I can give another update. Yes, on that.
We said we'll just make it nice and straightforward from that perspective. So, so I'm just going to set what I'm going to do. Obviously, I've spoken a lot in this session, so I'm going to shut up deliberately and let people give their thoughts. I'm just going to send a message to everyone just in case they didn't hear. I don't know what point we got up to before Tony's button kicked.
I think you said breakout rooms, and that was it. We were gone.
No worries.
Like a magic wand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really keen to hear people's thoughts, obviously, their sort of reflections on the survey or any things that didn't come out or any surprising things from that perspective as well. So yes, I'm just wondering in terms of particularly obviously Kate and Sharon, I know you've been involved in this work for quite a while. You've seen the sort of the headlines from that perspective, and similarly Rachel, but just wondering particularly sort of Laura and Amrita from your perspective, if there's anything that stood out or in relation from your experiences where you think actually there are opportunities and things that need to be done around this area of work. I was just wondering if you sort of had any reflections really.
I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised by the results at all. Yeah, I think one of my comments was included, but it was actually a positive comment though, was that our social worker has been great. Apart from when she was off, during the middle of it all, with a bit of a, well, not a bit of a, with a breakdown herself, and no one replaced her during that time. So the only major disaster was when she was off, and no one knew when she was coming back, and we didn't have a replacement social worker. And at one time they were just getting duty social workers to Zoom call on my iPad to check that someone could see Oscar, that he was alive, and that was the level of support we got for 3 weeks. And they were like, can you just turn the iPad around? They were like, oh, is that him? Okay, like they'd never seen him before. I could have just got another child off the street.
Not the other child there.
He looks fine, I suppose. That was it that we got for 3 weeks. But when our social worker was here, she was trying really hard, but I just felt like we had someone really supportive behind us in our corner the whole time, but everyone was just shutting doors in her face, just saying no, computer says no, kind of thing. And we did, I mean, it's now what, 15 months now since my respite package collapsed. Right. So it's, so I had a couple of kind of emergency nights 9 months ago, whatever, last summer, and that was the last time I had a full night's sleep. It is potentially going, I've been given another date again, but I've been given 5 or 6 dates that have then not happened. So I just feel like I can't even say the date out loud. But yeah, it's as we stand today, there's still, on paper, we have a great package, but I haven't had anything. And so it's, so I'm not surprised at all by those results. And I'm someone that's in the system, in the system, that has a social worker, that has a key worker, that has, so I know that I'm fortunate to have those services and have access to that. And, you know, and Oscar, my son, has a high, I've had the carers assessment, and we've got it all on paper. It's all, you know, if someone comes in and audits on a bit of paper what support this child gets, it's a lot of money, but I haven't spent a penny of it for 15 months, you know. So I really feel for the people that aren't even in the system at all, because I feel like they're even one step behind me, but even some people that are in the system, for various reasons, it just hasn't happened this last year, and it's been one of the hardest years of my life. But at least Oscar's at school now, which is the thing that's kept me going recently, because for a time the school closed as well.
And that was something that came out in the survey from people where their school was closed or they couldn't even get their child into the
and it's been a real mix, and it's been a mix as well, because obviously some children have been shielding, so they couldn't go in as well. So I know there's a real mix, and also, you know, each school has been very, and it's the same in mainstream, it's very individualistic. Some people have got great support at home, some people have had none. Some schools were open the whole time, some were not. And I felt like there was no government, there was no legal backup anymore. You know, that got taken away with the Coronavirus Act. So you couldn't even just stand there saying, you know, to the school or the council or to anyone, you've got a legal obligation to do this, because everyone was just like, actually, we kind of don't in this situation. And so it just felt like we were completely on our own, and it was really difficult, a really dark time for Oscar and I. His mental health was really poor. So it doesn't surprise me at all, and I'm sure there are lots of people that we still haven't reached that are
absolutely.
I mean, it's just
I quickly ask a question, Laura. Do you think some of that is specifically because of some of the COVID stuff that happened? So, from a commissioning angle around, and I can only just kind of talk about short breaks because that's what I kind of know about. When COVID first started, our specialist centres, so the Hamlet Centre, Shine, Shering Woodfields, actually all closed. And I must admit, at that point, my heart rate went through the roof. So did our residential short breaks units. But our residential short breaks units as well, they can normally have up to about 4 children in them. All of a sudden, they closed. Then they could only have 1. Then they could only have 2. We're still at the stage over actually how many can we have in? So do you think it's COVID related, some of that pressure? Not taken away, there's pressure in the system anyway, I get that. But how much of this is inflated because of COVID, which might start to get better? And then I suppose that's my issue. That's where I'm trying to get to, is actually how much has been exacerbated by COVID?
It's definitely a combination of the both. I feel like the system wasn't coping anyway, so therefore this was a massive straw that broke the camel's back. It couldn't pick, you know, there was no kind of provision to deal with emergencies hardly anyway. The problem we're having at the moment is Oscar's now been approved for residential, and the residential place that he's supposed to be going to, Foxwood, has been closed for 3 months because of
with an emergency in it. No, I know.
One child. So at the moment, it's technically not COVID reasons that he's not going there. The COVID was the reason that everything collapsed in the first place, because people that had to care for Oscar needed to shield and could no longer have him anymore.
Oh, okay.
And he's always deemed to be needing 2 to 1, but I'm a single parent, so he's just been with me the entire time. But in other situations, he has to be 2 to 1. And so the reason he can't go, so on paper, he's now finally been approved for respite for residential. But again, it was really hard to get that. I think that was just because there is literally no other family on the books at the moment that can have him. So therefore it's been approved, but they haven't been able to take anyone. And so I'm also concerned because I know that Foxwood are now getting a separate unit that's supposed to deal with these emergency admissions. So if a child or young person comes that whose needs are such that no other children can be in the main home for their respite, as is the case currently, that means that young person can be housed in this separate 2-bedder. And that should do that apparently. So I was like, oh, that sounds great, that finally we're going to solve this problem. However, when speaking to the manager of the home, they said, well, these events used to be once every couple of years. They've had 6 or 7 in the past 9 months or whatever. And apparently that's commissioned completely separately to them. So they don't know about staffing and things like that and how it'll work. So it still sounds like it's tenuous. And
so Laura, I can offer some assurance because I oversee all of those units. So there is a crisis unit that's been set up, and it's been specifically set up to avoid us having to close the respite units in an emergency. So actually then we want residential respite to go ahead without any kind of interference moving forward. And the other thing to just bear in mind about that as well is we're working alongside our health colleagues, because actually what we also have is an increasing amount of children with autism who are going into crisis sometimes in the family home, and they just need to come out for a little bit of time, for a bit of breathing space. So we are going to be using it for those kind of things. So there is enough to go around. I can assure you Foxwood has not been closed for 6 children this year. They've been closed, but they have been closed for 2, and they have been closed for a period of weeks each time. That's true.
Well, even at the moment they're there, they've got 1 child there, haven't they? And that 1 child's been there for the last 3 months or so, permanently.
He's now moved to a 52-week placement. He moved yesterday.
Oscar should start on Friday.
I was about to say we're trying to get people in really quickly afterwards.
But for the last 3, because this should have started on the 1st of his care should have started on the 1st of April. So for the and I've had the rest of my respite package pulled, and nothing put in place in the meantime. And every time I've spoken to Sue Connor, they've said no, you can't. We can't. You've got no more money. You've maxed out your budget through Foxwood. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm not getting Foxwood. And also, last year had a package of care of like £17,000 or something, of which we spent 0. So I feel like telling me no, there's no money is a little bit, rich, because actually quite a lot of money on Oscar in the last year.
I think that's a really fair point, because actually if you have, and so dare I say, some stuff is restricted because of COVID, and I have to say we kind of have to leave COVID to some extent, because that was quite extraordinary. But actually, if you've got an identified need, so an identified need for some level of overnight respite, and we aren't currently providing any of that, what's the alternative? That's the thing, isn't it? What's the backup plan? What's the
And that's my
contingency, the resilience.
That's why we got referred to residential, because they were like, we can't rely on linked families anymore to provide that for you. You need something that isn't going to collapse. And then that happened. And it, because Oscar is under the Children's National Sleep Clinic at Guy's and St Thomas's, and to which Dr. Allen said, oh, he's the only child I've managed to get in there, which I feel like isn't an accolade I want. Like, he's sleep, it's diabolical. It's really, really, really tough. And when his school closed completely, there was me and him in a small flat. We have no outside space. I have no family support locally. I have no support bubble. It was me and him, a child that needs 2-to-1 support with really challenging behaviour, in 2 tiny rooms in a heat wave inside, and that was a recipe for disaster for everyone. I spoke to the GP, and they were trying to put me on antipsychotics that I can't drive with, and I'm like, I can't take these medications and look after Oscar. It was a really dire situation. I understand that everything's kind of unprecedented because of that, but it feels like there's no flexibility in the system. It's just very much, no, you can't, this is what's on your bit of paper, when that need isn't being met. And the manager of Foxwood, Derek, is saying, well, what have they got you in the meantime? Of like, nothing. And I know that I feel like that the parallel planning doesn't happen, and we have to wait for everything to end up into a disaster situation before anyone deals with it. And then it gets to a point like now where, I'm having child and need meetings every 2 weeks, and it's 15 months in, and I still haven't got anything sorted. And it's exhausting. It's
Yeah.
just
So there's something about that. If your identified need isn't being met, what's your backup? What's your alternative?
and that's what I'm terrified
If there's
about,
a
like,
wait.
God,
Yeah.
God forbid we have a third wave and go in, you know, they shut the schools again. God forbid. I'm like, what's the backup plan if this happens again? We didn't know a pandemic was going to happen the first time, but now I just need to know there's a backup plan, because I never thought there would be a situation where everything would just fall away. And if there was an emergency,
Yeah.
if I go into hospital tomorrow, like my social worker was asking me, what happens, you know, when we didn't know how deadly this disease was. They're like, what happens if you go to hospital tomorrow? Who looks after Oscar? Oscar goes into care. There is no one I could leave him with. You know, there was no backup plans for anything, and everything just got pulled out from underneath us. And so now I feel even more pressure than I have previously, because I always thought there would be a system in an emergency that would catch him, and I don't feel there is at the moment.
I think that's key. I think what you've shared there, I think that learning from the pandemic thing, actually none of us expected this level of pandemic, and we all thought it was only going to be a couple of months. Like everyone thought, oh yeah, last June I'll be back to normal when it first started, March last year. I think actually learning, so actually what is that backup plan? So if something were to happen again on a similar scale, if we do get another wave from that perspective, just the time. I'm just wondering, Rita, from a completely different angle, in terms of actually from your perspective in health, in terms of how good you think the hospital are at saying identifying parent carers, or sort of actually linking parent carers in to make sure they're part of. I'm just wondering from your perspective, actually, is there areas that the hospital are doing well or they need to do better on from your sense?
There's definitely, well, in terms of looking at the survey results that you shared, Andy, and the presentations following on, some of the stuff did surprise me, and that's probably from a health perspective, kind of goes to show that there's a lot more for us to do within the hospital setting. I know where we have identified kind of, and with your help, we've been able to get some representation on our carers forum from some parent carers. So I'm really looking forward to kind of starting to scope out a little bit more, because I think we do have pockets of good practice within the hospital where it's done really well, but I'm not quite sure if it's consistent across. And it shouldn't be that parent carers are offered good support only in children and young people services, and not when they attend. For example, if you turn up at ED, do you get the same treatment as you would somewhere else? So those were some of the kind of key points that I'm taking away from everything that I've heard today, just to kind of see how we can, as a trust, as a hospital trust, be able to kind of bring in parent carers and the concepts that are really important in terms of being able to offer the holistic support whilst people accessing services here.
Can I just feedback? So for children with autism who come into NNUH, who come into contact with Fiona Springall, I've never heard, I mean, she's become a celebrity, I'll be absolutely honest with you, in regards to how she eases that young person experience and also family experience of people with autism as they come into the NNN. I mean, I've never seen any individual receive so much positive feedback. So I just want to let people know that's a really tangible difference has been made there.
Thank you. I will feed that back to her.
Brilliant. But I think that's really, I think there's been lots of work done around carers generally at the NNN, and obviously young carers recently, but I think parent carers is that one, because as you say, quite often the sort of children's wards, the children's departments, they get it right because they've seen the parent carers the whole time, and it's focused on the children and the link between it. But I think it's that wider work, and it's the same for NFFT. Again, within CAMS, they may well have that sense, but again, wide. It's the way whenever you do a breakout room, inevitably you'll always get cut off mid-flow. I didn't even realise we'd been put into breakout rooms, not even given instructions. So hopefully you found that. I know in our sort of room it's so helpful. I think particularly so Laura's sort of perspective on the past year and some of the challenges being faced. It'd be really good just to get a bit of feedback from each of the breakout rooms, just to some of the key themes that came up and some of the key issues that were discussed. Just see if there's any sort of commonality or things to sort of consider moving forward. Don't know, in terms of Tim or Rob, do either of you want to go first in relation to the breakout rooms you were in?
Yeah, we could have done with a bit more time. We was in terms of answering all the questions, but we had quite a lot of reflection on, and there was some insight from what other local authorities had done in terms of the key working opportunity, in terms of what that could bring, recognizing that the system is really complex to navigate, and having someone alongside you to do that would be really beneficial. And then also some reflections on sort of the fight that some kind sometimes feel what it's like in terms of existing, that you're coming up against barriers, but then also having someone to reflect that with, in terms of, and also undertaking some actions in terms of chasing sort of like evidence for EHCPs, those sorts of things, or knowing where to go next. So there was quite a lot of reflection on that opportunity. And then we had some discussion around sort of the EHCP process, and they're not directly related to sort of parent carers, but in terms of actually that again is a complex system to navigate, and the time it's taken the local authority to undertake the process, and that sort of question about whether there's more that could be done in the preventative space to identify need early and respond to it before it got to the HCP stage as well. But I think from discussion, there was lots of transition points, and perhaps too many. And if we don't manage those transition points really well, sometimes we can get lost within the system. And that's all really that we covered in our group in the time that we had.
Brilliant, thanks. I'll go to Tim's group, and then once I've done my group, and I'll open the floor out a bit more wider. Tim, do you want to come in with anything from your side?
Yeah, I think Bethany's going to.
I've been scribbling down some notes.
Brilliant, thanks, Bethany.
So what we said was generally there was no huge surprises in what we heard from the survey results. And actually we wanted how much of that was specific to Norfolk and to parent carers. Actually, there was a recognition that from the survey that there's a need to work harder to create a truly integrated system, and that would be would solve a lot of what we're seeing and hearing. We talked a lot about how much carers are giving up to do caring, and how there's an increase. Lots of services cost more when you're a parent carer, especially if your young person needs 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 care, and you're often doing that while low income or benefits, as we saw from the number of parent carers either not working or working part-time. And that in the face of losing things and giving things up, actually what was really important was for parent carers to be able to feel some autonomy and self-determination about what they were, about how they lived their lives, and that some of that could be gained by, rather than putting in services or additional bits of benefits or different things, actually giving the parent carer access to the money so they could decide how that was best spent and used for themselves, rather than putting in services which we thought would be helpful. We also had a brief discussion about direct payments and how they work in Norfolk and how they don't roll over year on year, and whether that was made clear to parent carers. And I think what Tim was saying was that we do say that, and the comment I would have added if we had time was, I think in Norfolk, sometimes we think because we've said something once in a letter or a leaflet somewhere, we think we've made something clear, and that's not just about direct payments, that could be about a number of things. And actually saying something once isn't necessarily clarity. It's, we can point that we've said it, but have we made all of the rules and the nuances of how you access a variety of our services really obvious and understandable to people, including parent carers.
Brilliant. Perfect. Thanks, Bethany. And then just to add, from the group I was in, again, there weren't any sort of real surprises. There was a lot of really helpful conversation about respite and the sort of the impact of COVID on that, and similarly again about where budgets weren't spent last year, and then in terms of actually impacts for this year. I think one of the key things in terms of the learnings is what's the backup plan for if we were to have something similar to this again, or there's another wave. Actually, what's the backup plan if respite then falls through from that sense, because that had a huge impact on parent carers. We also had conversations, so we had Amrita from the NNN looking about work that they need to do to get consistency across the hospital. So saying actually in children's wards and actually children's teams, actually they're probably really good about the parent carer side of things, but there's pockets of good practice, but there's probably not consistency. So there's parent carers now linked into the carers forum, but that's an area that Rita's going to take away to really work on that from that perspective. So I'm just really keen to open up in terms of if there's anyone who wants to come in with any other thoughts or comments that you haven't. And the chat's been really active and going on lots of different areas from that perspective. I've seen Mike's put in there about the process to try and enrol and train where there's not a natural workforce available. So around, again, direct payment carers sort of coming in. So I think that's come up around that workforce side of things. And again, there's a lot of work going on county-wide around that sort of that health and social care workforce side of things. So again, making sure parent carers sort of linked into that where this is irrelevant as well. But is anyone else wanting to come in at all? I'm not sure. I think you can raise your hand in terms of, but I think Bill, I think you've got your actual hand up there. So do you want to come in there? I'll unmute you. Try to unmute you, Bill. Yeah.
Can you?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll just say that this has been really, really helpful, I think, and some impressive points raised. But I'm a bit surprised there's not much talk about GPs, and I was particularly interested in the point about registration. Have I understood this correctly? If somebody who's a patient is a carer, then that fact should be noted on their medical records, so it's flagged up. I mean, is that right? And is it why it's not happening as often as it should be?
Correct.
And does it mean that should GPs have a more proactive role in making sure that happens?
Yeah, I think there's two elements to it. I think one is absolutely yes, there should be more parent carers actually on their carers register. But then I think the key part is now what happens in terms of with the carers register. How do you make the most of the opportunity? They're great, you've got so many parent carers on there, but what do we do with that? How do we make sure we're using that to get information out of them? Are they making sure that parent carers, for example, are having their own sort of annual health checks from that perspective? Are they being told, yes, your priority for the flu vaccination? I think it's, again, that sort of key opportunity. So rather than just being sat on another list, what we do, but there's definitely opportunities there. Rachel, do you want to come in?
Sorry, Andy, I just wanted to raise the fact that we had a couple of issues earlier in COVID around the vaccinations, whereby some GPs decided that people's children weren't autistic enough to warrant grading a parent as a parent carer. So I think that there's, a greater recognition of actually autism is autism, irrespective of where you are on that spectrum. There is a huge need, and I don't really think any GP should be saying to a parent, your child isn't bad enough for you to be deemed a parent carer.
And I think we saw that a lot, I think, in some areas, and some areas even more so than Norfolk. I think obviously there are a couple of examples there I've seen in other local authorities where it's sort of system-wide, where there's a lot of fear around, oh no, we can't have them on the vaccine list, it's going to they're jumping the queue to get the vaccine from that perspective. The reality is, no, they're not from that sense. But I think the vaccine rollout is progressing really well. I think now it's saying, well, this is irrespective of the vaccine. This is now about actually making sure that carers' own health is being prioritised. They're linking in from that perspective. So I think this is part of a Norfolk-wide work we need to do around carers, because it'll be the same for young adult carers and young carers who should be on their GP register. For adult carers, there's a whole lot of work we need to do about getting more carers on the register, but then also what we do about it. We've had conversations about emergency plans today and this morning. Again, that's an area. So how do we make sure people remember to get an emergency plan, but then also update it as well? So I think there's lots of opportunities there as well. I'm conscious of time. Has anyone else got any sort of points coming in? Johnny is put in there about sort of Mike's experience being so useful. And I think that sort of self-determination point has been something that's been really key that I took away from that sense as well. No, if there's no other points to make, just to say from my perspective, a real thank you for everyone who's attended today. I think it's been really helpful to share these experiences, but also to discuss some of these areas of next steps. So what I'll do is I'll be sharing a copy of the slides with the survey results. Thanks to Johnny's feedback, I'm going to update the colour scheme on the graphs to make it a bit clearer for people, but I will also include some of these keynotes as well. I think the key thing just to say is if any parent carers are here and not linked in to Family Voice or not accessing support from Sensational Families, they're on the call here. And there's been some links in the chat there. So I would really suggest people to look them up and to get involved, because I think they've both been key to some of this work moving forward. And whether it's emergency planning, whether it's parent carers needs assessments, the transitions into adult services, the ideas for new preventative support for parent carers, the whole range of things that need to be done. We need parent carers to be shaping that moving forward. So if you're not involved, please do get involved if you feel able to. I'll stick around after people have gone in case anyone wants to ask me any questions as well. And I'll also put my email address in the chat just in case anyone wants to get hold of me after the event as well. But otherwise, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's attended. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Carers Week, and no doubt I'll see people soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.